This job, we try to save as many people as we can. Sometimes that doesn't mean everybody. But you don't give up.
New York, Washington, D.C., Sokovia.
Okay, that's enough.
Captain, people are afraid.
That's why I'm here. We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game.
I'm sorry, Tony. If I see a situation pointed south, I can't ignore it. Sometimes I wish I could.
Sometimes I want to punch you in your perfect teeth.
I know we're not perfect. But the safest hands are still our own.
I was wrong about you. The whole world was wrong about you. They're coming for you.
I'm not the one that needs to watch their back.
This doesn't have to end in a fight, Tony.
You just started a war. Sit down. Final warning.
I could do this all day.
All right, I've run out of patience. On to Ruse!
Hey, everyone.
Oh my God. I don't know if anybody else out there remembers seeing that trailer and that very last scene. I remember when I saw it for the first time, I lost my freaking mind. And I'm sure that everyone who's watching tonight's show probably did too. And many members of our MCU review panel. So I'm not going to keep them sitting in the virtual waiting room much longer. Let's bring them all in. My name is Elliot Serrano. I am one of the MCU review crew, joined by my fellow James Bond fan cast reviewer. Dave Pino. How you doing, Dave?
I'm all right. How are you?
I am doing very, very well. Add to that our caffeinated comics host, John Clark. You're muted, my friend.
And there goes my opening.
There it goes. If there was anyone who lost his mind with the introduction of the new Spider-Man, that was you. I know.
Articulated eyes. I'm going to start with that.
There we go. And then we have our resident MCU review mixologist, Mr. Tom Chetner.
Evening, guys.
Buddy.
We do have a drink that is debuting tonight. And yes, I managed to get a sample of it to John Clark, who's been missing out on the drinks.
So much out of your way, I suggested you broadcast from here. You were like, I'd rather do more traffic.
I had to be home with my doggy is what I had to do. I had to be home with my doggy. And yeah. And I regret that we were unable to get a sample of tonight's MCU review cocktail to our special guest who's joining us tonight to talk about Captain America Civil War, Dr. Suzana Flores.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Suzana has been on Caffeinated Comics in the past and is a psychologist, as well as the author of Untamed, The Psychology of Marvel's Wolverine. Suzanne and I, we became very close and very good friends over her creating that or writing that book, because let's face it, if it wasn't for me, maybe the book wouldn't exist. That's why you did.
True, actually.
I'm sorry?
It's absolutely true, actually. You're the one that introduced me to Paul Jenkins, right? Who ended up writing the foreword to Untamed, and you were my X-Men expert and reviewed the majority, I think, right? And so, like, you also helped me figure out the best comics to look at, given the particular topics that I was going for. You know, in each chapter, you're like, you got to check this one out and this one. I'd be lost without you, and that's God's honest truth.
Oh, wow. Okay, I was saying that as a joke, but now you validated it.
No, it's true.
Thank you.
It's absolutely true.
No, actually, you probably would have done quite well without me, because the moment I introduced you to Paul, by the way, I was able to introduce you to Paul Jenkins because Paul Jenkins once sharked me at a pool table. The dude's a pool shark. Sharked me at a pool table at San Diego Comic-Con many years ago, although he is a stand-up guy. But yeah, so Susanna's joining us tonight. And it's wonderful to have you here. We actually haven't had a chance to talk in a long time, so I'm really happy.
In a minute.
That you're, yeah, it's been more than a minute. I also want to greet everyone else who's watching us on the live stream. Hey, Susan. Hey, Joe. Everyone, Lehman, thank you so much. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, if you're watching us on YouTube or on Twitch TV, thank you so much for joining us here. You get some added bonus when you watch the live stream, because you're going to see a lot of things. There are surprises in the live stream that you miss if you only listen to the audio version on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. But if you want to listen to us in your car, at the office, while you're taking a bath, I don't know who'd want to listen to us while they're taking a bath, but you can. You can do that on the audio podcast. I'm okay. I have the drink here that Tom made. We're not going to go into it yet, but let's just say I've been sampling it, and whoa.
And you're talking about people taking baths immediately.
There we go. All right. So to open today's show, I guess we are talking about Captain America: Civil War. The first thing we always like to do before going really in depth into our commentary on the film, we like to do what we call our 2-minute MCU movie review. So that's where each of our panelists gives a 2-minute overview, their opinion of the film, what they thought, just what their impressions were, whether this is the first time they've seen the movie, whether they've seen it multiple times, how did this time compare? And since you are our special guest, Susanna, why don't you go first?
Well, I just watched the movie again yesterday, and I watched the timeline in order, and I watched Civil War when it first came out. So I will say this, my first impression of the movie was I was kind of confused, because I would have imagined that Iron Man and Captain America's roles would have been reversed in terms of the conflict, because Tony's kind of like your rebel dude. No one's going to contain me. No one's going to tell me what to do. And Captain is military, or former military. And so it did kind of confuse me as to the stance. I guess we're going to get into that in a bit. Until I saw the timeline, and I realized that, he did toe the line. Captain, I'm speaking of, right? He did toe the line, and he saw where the line ended, which was corruption. And I think that changed everything for him, and then, Tony being confronted by the mother of a deceased, and it just made him feel this sense of perhaps accountability that he may or may not be that used to being Tony Stark. So that's the thing that really turned for me when I watched it several different times, especially yesterday. And as a psychologist, I have to tell you, the movie's fantastic. You see so many not conflicts on a micro level and a macro level. And so people have to question, who they really are, what they stand for, and who they are as a group, individual. There's so many things going on in this movie. It's fantastic.
That's some great insight. Thank you. Because he rarely gets to talk on the show these days, I'm going to go to Dave next.
I think this is one of the best films in the series. I remember feeling that way. I remember thinking it was the best when it first came out at its original release up to that point. And I hadn't seen it in a couple of years when I rewatched it yesterday. And I think it's still sort of stands the test of time amongst the rest of the MCU films, especially in light of the current phase of films, which has been very hit or miss. This one just, it feels like the tension, the drama, everything is very is sort of earned and believable, and the conflict between all the characters feels genuine. You feel you actually care about these characters because they've built them up so well over the previous several films, and just the way that they introduce characters, Black Panther, Spider-Man. And that reminds me, was the trailer you showed at the start of the stream, was that the initial trailer? Because I couldn't remember if they revealed Spider-Man that quickly or if it was the second one. Okay, that's what I thought. Because I remember thinking, like, when it was first, the rumors first started and the movie was being filmed, how far along in the process it started to become believable that Spider-Man was going to have a role in it. But then you're right, that moment in that trailer when he first appears, that was just kind of mind-blowing. But yeah, I think it just does everything so well. And I think it was the longest Marvel movie up to that point, but it doesn't feel super long. It doesn't feel like it drags. And I think actually the last, 20, 25 minutes or so of the movie might be the best that the movie has to offer. The conflict, the showdown between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, that big knockdown, drag-out fight they have at the end. It's one of the coolest scenes, I think, in the whole series. So, yeah, I still think this is probably top 5, maybe even a top 3 MCU film.
John Clark.
This is my favorite Marvel movie, and it was when it came out, and it has not been beaten. This one is the one that kicks everything into overdrive, where every character matters, every movie matters, and it pushes it farther along. This, of course, they took the title from the Marvel event of 2006, Civil War, which also had Cap and Tony against each other, taking sides about whether or not to reveal their identities to the world. And this movie does a much better job than the comic did. The comics remembered as the last great event until maybe Hickman redid Secret Wars. But I remember reading the comic at the time, you didn't really have a reason to root for Tony. It seemed like very clearly, and I remember Marvel saying in the press releases, is like, you're going to side with whoever you want to side with, and every character is going to take a side, and it's really up to you. But very quickly in that series, Cap became the hero, and Tony became the villain. And in this, it's much more balanced, where you get the motivations of each. To your point, Suzana, when they took the opposite sides in the comics, the Marvel was like, oh, isn't that cool? We didn't do what you expected. But they didn't really build it up. And in the movie, they build up Tony's guilt, which is a motivating factor from Iron Man 1, of like, the things I do have these consequences on innocent people. It's one of the reasons he becomes Iron Man. It's a big part of Age of Ultron, which is not as successful a movie, of that idea of wanting to build a suit of armor around the world. And I agree with you, too. We come out of Winter Soldier, and this is where Cap is disillusioned, which also goes back to a lot of the Cap comics in the 70s around Watergate, when he quit being Captain America and started being Nomad. And the reason I'm making all these points up front is because I'm going to talk about nothing but Spider-Man for the rest of this show.
And real quick, I want to throw in that when they first were proposing the comic book event, that was going to be the, as you said, Suzanne, in the very beginning, that was supposed to be the dynamic where Captain America was the one who said, we need to follow what the government says, and Tony was going to be the rebel. And I want to say it was Joss Whedon or someone who said, no, it shouldn't work that way. It should be the other way around. So, yeah.
Was that when Joss Whedon was writing Astonishing X-Men?
Yes.
That's why he would have been part of Marvel Comics at that point.
And then Mark Miller wrote the comic book. Yeah.
Right.
And the death of Captain America was supposed to be the ending of Civil War. Joss Whedon had proposed that Cap should die at the end to be the down point that would lead into the next event. All right, and not to be forgotten, because I know he also created a drink for today's film, Tom Jetner.
Still my favorite part of, maybe one of my favorite parts of in the entire MCU is that moment. Actually, anytime that I feel sad, I just look that up. I just look that clip up on Disney Plus or whatever, and I just play it because it just makes me feel good. But I think we talked about when we talked about Age of Ultron, of wanting the moment of the Avengers kind of being peak Avengers, or to get that moment of them being in their prime. And I think we kind of get that in this movie. I think this is Avengers 2.5 in many regards. We have all the characters together. We have the fully realized versions, you could say, of many of these characters. Seeing them all interact very much the way you would see that in the comic book at the same time. This is kind of feels like a very comic booky movie, and being able to introduce multiple characters. We've already talked about Spider-Man many times. We really, really need to talk about the introduction of T'Challa and Black Panther, because that was one thing I walked out of this movie when I first saw it, of being very impressed by, being blown away by Chadwick Boseman's performance. And it because we'll do it when we get to Black Panther proper, but that's actually my favorite MCU movie. And with everything that's happened since, kind of seeing the way he's introduced with the camera just kind of closing slowly on with his back turned, it hurt a little, seeing that, given everything that's happened since then. But yeah, to sum up, that this is kind of seeing that kind of prime Avengers movie of seeing everyone together and really having all of the character development of all the previous movies be able to play off and interplay against each other with very little need to do exposition or other moving parts. So it's just great.
And just I would echo all the thoughts that you have all given. Wonderfully stated. I will say, I've seen this movie several times. Like many of you, this is one of my favorite of the MCU movies. I will admit, Infinity War pushes this one back a little bit, just because it did everything that Civil War did, but on a grander scale. All the character moments in here are earned. All the bits that they do not cheat on the script. They do not cheat with any of the characters. Everyone, you see everything they've built between Tony's relationship with Steve Rogers and Natasha. You see Natasha, who has a relationship with both Cap and Tony Stark. She's on both sides. She's bouncing back and forth. And there's just, of course, when you throw in James Rhodes into the mix, you throw in Sam Wilson, all these supporting characters, everyone, all interconnected, all those dynamics, the way they worked was just, I got to say, it was every moment in that movie was earned, and it paid off everything that they were doing up to that point with the previous films. Unlike, I hate to say it, Justice League, where, I mean, let's be honest, some folks forget, this movie would come out around the same time as Batman versus Superman, or right after.
And pivots on some of the same points that when we get to the end, and I forgot, Tony goes, he killed my mom. I'm like, that's the entire plot of Batman versus Superman, except in this I care.
Exactly. And so, and it seemed like when they were writing the script to Civil War, they were answering all the issues that people had with Man of Steel. And then you go into Batman versus Superman, which tries to introduce Wonder Woman and other supporting characters, but does it clumsily, as opposed to, I mean, let's face it, this movie, it gave us Black Panther and Spider-Man, and it worked. It just fit in the overall story. And to Dave's point, this movie is 2.5 hours. There is not a single wasted minute in this film. There is nothing in the movie that felt self-indulgent where you went, that they probably could have cut that out. They could have cut that out. Hell, when they bring Scott Lang into it, we talked about Ant-Man last time, we got an incredible payoff, after meeting him in his own film, bringing him into the overall picture. Again, everything paid off, and it was earned. So, yeah. All right, Tom. Before we get too far into the discussion of the film, tell us a little bit about our themed drink, where if you go to Instagram and review cocktails, you can see it today.
All right. Well, I've been excited about this particular one for a while, since I've kind of planned many of these out in advance. So this is mostly is the Savoy Civil War. And it's an opportunity to talk about splits and divides. And I was thinking about the history of vermouth that we talked about when we did our James Bond cocktail episode. And we talked about the martini and the interplay between sweet and dry vermouth. And in a lot of early 20th century American cocktail books, you will see requirements for French style vermouth or Italian style vermouth, referring to dry and sweet. However, if you go back in time a little bit, the places where sweet and dry vermouth come from were not France and Italy. They were both part of the same country, which was the Kingdom of Savoy, or I think by the mid-19th century, the Kingdom of Sardinia. And they were both part of the same province of Savoy. And the kings of Sardinia during the mid-19th century decided that they'd really prefer to be the kings of Italy. And in exchange for the Second French Empire, yes, there were two French empires, the Second French Empire giving support to the king of Sardinia in his war against the Austrian Empire to unify the Italian peninsula, the king would hand over the part of the province of Savoy that was northwest of the Alps. And that includes the region of Chambéry, which is where dry vermouth really took off. So you have this divide, you have a split in what was once the style, the signature drink of one country becomes two. And so to illustrate that, I use the two different styles of vermouth. We have Dolin Vermouth de Chambéry, which is part of Savoy, just on the other side of the border. It was one of the first places to start making dry vermouth in the 19th century. And Coqui Vermouth de Torino. Torino is the birthplace of sweet vermouth. And then to represent the Italian side of the conflict, we have Campari. And to represent the French side, we have Cognac. So it's all kind of mixed up in a sort of a Negroni style or a Boulevardier style, and depending on how you look at it, of 1 part Campari, 1 part Cognac, and a half part each of sweet and dry vermouth, topped with the citrus peel. So you can find all of that way too in-depth history at the Instagram page Review Cocktails. And also one final note, please remember this, keep your vermouth in the refrigerator. I cannot emphasize this enough. I have made this mistake. Keep the vermouth once you've opened it in the refrigerator. It is wine. It will go bad if you leave it in your liquor cabinet, and then your martinis and your Negronis and your Manhattans are not going to taste as good. So that's all.
Do not blame us if your vermouth goes bad. And yes, you could also see the recipes as well as Tom preparing those drinks on the MCU ReVU Instagram. Both Instagrams are linked up, but give the Review Cocktails Instagram page a follow and share. And if you have any feedback on the cocktails, we'd love to hear it. This is a fun thing that we do.
Please, absolutely. And I'm also occasionally I'm throwing up if it's Saturday night and I decide to have a Mai Tai. I'll throw that up too with the recipe and everything like that. Or if it's a Thursday night and I really really need a good martini, then that's up there too.
And we'll throw in, we'll throw on some of those James Bond cocktails that we talked about. People would like to hear those, see those.
Oh, well, we did talk about the Indiana Jones one.
Yes, we'll be doing that on Caffeinated Comics, actually.
Yes, we did do the Indiana Jones one, and then we could talk about how the Vesper isn't a very good drink as well.
Now,
or it's an inferior drink to a dry martini.
I've had both. Yes. So again, Suzana, I regret that we were unable to send you a sample of tonight's drink. It's kind of a thing you've seen. Both Dave and I have been doing that. John has been, even though he has it, he's been
my
resisting.
first one.
Oh, there we go.
And it's red, which I'm assuming Tom is on Team Tony.
I'm the only one not drinking. Is that right?
Yeah, sorry.
No, what?
Oh, I've been doing this for months, Suzanne.
I feel like I have water. I feel cheated. Right?
I know.
I'm gonna sneak in a drink, and I'm like, no, that's not proper.
Oh, this is. Well, I mean, you don't have to. You could be.
John's been without drinks because he's been without. I haven't been able to get him a sample. Part of that is my fault, and part of that is Elliot drinking the sample that I gave him for the Age of Ultron.
There were some episodes where I just drank something else.
Yeah.
Susanna, if you want to turn off your camera, run to the kitchen and run back.
I'm going to.
Go on.
Don't know how to turn off the camera.
Just go on ahead. Well, just mute yourself. We'll
look at you.
And for folks who are listening to this on the podcast, see, that's the stuff you miss when you don't watch the live stream. Mind you, you can, if you would like to watch this video after the fact. All our videos are archived on facebook.com/MCU ReVU, as well as our YouTube page. If you go to facebook.com/MCU ReVU, you can find links to all our videos, both on our Facebook page and YouTube. If you go to youtube.com, just do a search for MCU ReVU. You'll find our page. All our episodes in order. We also threw in a couple extras when we reviewed the Spider-Man No Way Home Blu-ray release. And I think that's the only thing we've done out of order so far. And it's been, we are talking about doing the Marvel series on Disney Plus, and fingers crossed, we might have a very, very special guest for when we talk to Ms. Marvel. I'm not going to say who because I don't want to jinx it, but this would be huge if I could get this person to appear on the show. But we've got lots of folks who are going to come on and talk about the films. Again, we're going in chronological order, in order of release, not in order of story, because that gets confusing. And then people say, well, you should be watching Captain Marvel now. I'm like, we're not going there yet. Anywho, and Suzanne, you were actually gonna come in for Doctor Strange the next time. Yeah.
I love Doctor Strange.
I mean, you can come back for Doctor Strange if you want.
I will totally come back for Doctor Strange. He's next to Logan. He's my other fave, to be honest.
You should be doing a book on the psychology of Doctor Strange.
I might just do that.
Do that.
I'm kind of working on the female villains.
Those are good.
I'm kind of exploring that theme.
Can you tell us a little bit, real quick, not to detour too much, but since you're on, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what inspired you to write about comic book heroes and their psychologies?
Sure. So I am a trauma specialist and a pain specialist. I'm also a pain patient myself. I have a bit of chronic pain and experienced a trauma a few years ago. I was never involved in the comic book world at all. I mean, aside from the Hugh Jackman movies, the Wolverine movies, but that was always a perk. But when I experienced a trauma, a friend, Al Padilla, mentioned Wolverine, like a comparison, he has pain, he has trauma. And I remember I was walking past a comic book store and I saw this panel of Like he's beaten in Battle Hellfire Club. I think it was, what was it, X-Men 133? Might get that wrong, 133, somewhere around there. Anyway, he's beaten in battle, and then the claws come out, and he's like, okay, suckers, now it's my turn. And then he goes all Mount St. Helens on everybody. And I remember thinking, like, I want to be him. I need that. I need that kind of strength and resiliency. And so I started just kind of looking him up, and it became kind of an obsession at that point where I'm like, okay, he is like PTSD personified. Like, I can write this guy, and like, so he's surly and he's loyal and he's loving and nurturing, and then he's surly again. It's like this play of like, want to get close. Yeah, you like want to get close, but not too close. That's classic PTSD. Safety at the top of the list, distrust at the top of the list, easy to aggravate, can go 0 to 60 very quickly because people tend to function more out of the limbic system of the brain than the executive functioning area of the brain, the cortex, during trauma. But, to kind of sum up all of that, I began to interview the creators of Wolverine through Chandler Rice from Desert Wind Comics, he and his wife Sharon, who did so much for me, connected me to so many people. Elliot, as mentioned, connected me to Paul Jenkins, and Paul and I started talking about, like resiliency and pain and what it means to be judge, jury, and executioner, and the burden of all of that. And it's like, there were like in the origin story, like there were two brothers, and like, how one can veer one way and the other, and his personal story with that. And what's interesting is that many of these writers and artists, including Paul, like, it's like, okay, well, why Wolverine? And I said, well, someone already wrote about Batman. That's Dr. Travis Langley, Batman and Psychology, great book, by the way. And I said, well, I'll try to do Wolverine on the other side. And they were like, oh, that's great. Now tell me why you really chose Wolverine. And I'm like, damn, you guys are good. And I was like, damn you. And so I started, I shared my story and, of my personal trauma and journey and trying to heal and all of that. And so we just had some great conversations about like how their pain, how their darkness, how their, like their journey towards the light, their struggle comes out on the page as well. And in this, I would have never in a million years thought like, which psychologist would be like so associated with this, short, kind of angry, hairy dude with the claws, right? Half human, half mutant, me, because he is traumatized. Pain is a personal friend of his. They have a like long-standing relationship there. In the Weapon X program, I argue that Logan was violated, right? Like it's the definition of that. And I included the psychology of torture, where I had to interview people that have actually done that sort of work. I needed a Disney movie and many scotches after interviewing some people, on that. We did like the triangulation of like Scott and Jean and Logan, and why Jean would, go with Scott. And they argued like, Mariko, in my opinion, is his true soulmate, where Jean represents his strength and resiliency. Mariko represents his vulnerability, which is like his greatest fear, in my opinion. It's not Sabretooth, or becoming Sabretooth, it's vulnerability, like any person who's experienced trauma. So, it is modern mythology. That's what I realized through this journey, and there's so many ways to perceive it and conceptualize it. And so this mutant, right, was in a very surprising way part of my healing. And after, the book was finished and I, interviewed everybody, it was an incredible journey. Started writing, signing books. People came up to me at my booth and they would share their own stories of trauma. We'd hug, we'd cry. It was great. And shortly thereafter, I got invited to do a TEDx talk on Wolverine. So that one's called Untamed: What Wolverine Teaches Us About Rage. And it's in defense of rage and anger, as they are calls to action, right? Something is unjust. I am being disrespected, or my family's being disrespected, and I got to take care of business. That's what anger does. And it has a bad rap, but it's simply that. It's a call to action, just like any emotion. It serves us as long as it's channeled appropriately. And Logan, throughout his whole life, tries to evolve, through his mentors, through being martial artists, right? Through being a samurai, he is trying to create that balance. So no matter what, he never stops trying. And the struggle is real, and the struggle is continuous, just for many of us. And so that's why Wolverine is, and probably will always be, my guy.
Whew, man. That got deep.
Well,
really
considering all the characters that have experienced trauma and what they go through in this movie, Suzana, who do you identify with most? Who do you think is processing their trauma the best, and who's processing their trauma the most unhealthiest in Civil War?
The best, I would say, the first thought that occurred to me was Black Widow, because she's been through a lot of shit. Am I allowed to say shit on here? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's been through a lot of shit, right? And she sees both sides of the situation, and she's even aware of like her own internal conflict, and she's trying to be in the middle of something where like it's two seriously opposing sides. It's kind of like reflective of the world right now, isn't it? And so I think that she's channeling it probably the best way that she can, meaning like she can still see, okay, despite polarizing points of view, these two guys are still my friends. And I'm still their friends, no matter what. I don't want to kill either of them, and I want to remain there. So I would say she does. Tony is in like what we call the dark night of the soul. Dun, dun, dun. It sounds very dramatic, right? He's in that part of the journey of introspection, of where he's feeling it, right? And that is changing the course and changing his morality and changing, from being a bit egocentric to understanding, as Elliot said, like the consequences of his behavior. So he's on the right path, definitely. In terms of who may not be handling it the best, that's a tough one. Definitely, what's his name? Baron.
Baron Zemo.
Yeah, of course, he's not handling it the best. T'Challa, not great at the beginning, and then definitely has this moment. I actually wrote it down. Can I read it?
Yeah.
Because I thought it was like so powerful. And he said, okay, so let's see. So he realizes that the Baron is trying to, get all of them to kill each other, right? And then so he said, vengeance has consumed you. It has consumed them. I'm done letting it consume me, right? Again, anger has its purpose, right? Until it doesn't. And so, like, he came to the point of the light of, I will not be controlled by my pain.
That's
like,
really
I'm
interesting.
another way to grieve.
Yeah, T'Challa's the only one we see go through his trauma in this movie. Everyone else is talking about their trauma from their past or from a different movie. Tony's talking about Sokovia. Spider-Man makes a reference to Uncle Ben. Winter Soldier is talking about what happened to him. And Tony starts talking about his parents. But T'Challa, we actually see his father die in this. So I think you got a great point. He's the one that goes through the biggest arc because he's not dealing with, he hasn't brought baggage into the story. He goes through the entire arc within this story, even though he's a fairly minor character in this.
Yeah, he skips a couple stages of grief. Like he goes from perhaps like the denial to acceptance right away, right? To perhaps the bargaining of like, I need to get, vengeance, to anger. And then he comes out at the other end so wise, right? So incredibly wise of like, it's a, a dialectic in our world. Two things can exist at the same time. You can be insanely angry at someone or a situation, and then you can also not want to be consumed by it. So like the emotion is real. There's many reasons for the emotion, and many of us have many reasons to be pissed off, right? But I refuse to be defined by it. I can feel it, but it is not me. It will not become part of my identity. And that's where T'Challa is. So I would say of everybody, probably T'Challa goes through the journey and is the healthiest at the end.
There's that wonderful moment, that scene with T'Challa and Zemo, where with the visual medium is the actual literal retraction of claws.
And he's like, he decides, okay, I'm not going to do this,
Right.
And that for a moment was, you think, oh, he's going to get him now. I will say too, the whole thing about Zemo, there's that clever bit where he's listening to his phone, and for a moment, early on, you think it's actually him talking to his wife, and you learn later on that it just keeps listening to the last voicemail message that she sent him at the end. But this was also a man. This was a man who was in the military. He was part of a kill squad, as was stated, the Sokovian kill squad. We will also learn later on in the Falcon and Winter Soldier that he came from money. He was the whole Baron Zemo thing was not just a thing throughout. He was really a baron. He had, substantial wealth, which would allow him to kind of like do his thing once he's out. I will say this: after watching Civil War, I definitely want to get back into Falcon and Winter Soldier to see the types of things. I will say, Suzana, help me out with this, because we will, of course, when we go into, let's say, Falcon and Winter Soldier, when Baron Zemo is a villain in this film, in Civil War, he's going to become kind of a fan favorite once Falcon and Winter Soldier comes out. There's even a bit where he's dancing in a club, and Marvel would go out and release like an hour-long clip of him in the club dancing, and people would talk about how much they love Baron Zemo. Yeah.
Wow.
Like, what a great character he is. I'm going, this dude killed innocent people. It's like the same problem I have with people loving Loki so much. Loki killed thousands of people in New York. It's like people idolizing Bin Laden after a while because, he can dance, and they made a cute meme with him. Maybe that seems like kind of extreme because we are talking about fictional characters versus real. But there's this whole thing where we want to, in wrestling, we want to turn our heels into faces, and we want to love them and kind of like ignore what their characters have done in the past. Am I far off in my assessment here?
I would say as humans, it's part of our nature to embrace the dark, right? And so, like, if there is a scandal, we want to hear all about it, right? If there, presidential scandal, like, wet blue dress, that's gross. Tell me more, right? And yes, I went there. And so we are attracted to anti-heroes, perhaps many of us, anti-heroes more than heroes, because they reflect, and this definitely includes me. Like, I didn't need Superman. I wanted Wolverine because he could really mess some people up, and that's how I felt at the time, right? And so there's this little belief that someone can be turned around, things that keep us in bad relationships for far too long. I think many of us have been there, right? Like, oh, he or she can change, right? Or I can change them. And then later on, you're like, woo, right? But
like years of that was an isolated incident.
Right? It's like, wow. But yeah, then you have your own come to Jesus moment. You're like, what was I thinking, right? But it is this belief that, the bad boys or the bad girls, they tend to be more charming than the people that toe the line, right? They tend, because if, let's say, you are a narcissist, you tend to be very charming. That's part of their nature. That's part of their psyche. And again, there's this belief that there must be a good side to them. At least we like to believe so. So we like to see the evolution, right? And we did see a little bit of the evolution of Loki, a little bit, right? It was there, right? Where it's like, okay, he might be a good guy after all. And that's what we live for. It's like that, this conflict, this turnaround, this transformation, evolution, because it reflects us. Like, we are messed up in many ways. Many of us are. Who isn't in some way? So like we have hope that this person can turn around and see the light, even when they don't.
Well, that's a huge theme in this film, is that, everyone wants to get Bucky. Bucky's done some bad stuff, and he'll admit that he's done some bad stuff. And also the central thing here is that Cap knows what Bucky's done, and he's kind of holding back from Tony. I will say that was expertly done. I'm watching, again, I've seen this movie a whole bunch of times, and I was watching it this time. I'm like, wow, the screenwriters were really good about setting things up and not showing all their cards until that last boom. And you sit and you go, it went boom, right for the gut. That Bucky's the one who kills, Tony's parents, and not in a graphic way, but in a way that it's really emotional. And then Robert Downey Jr. was incredible in that scene. Like he's watching his parents die on video, and it's just his expressions, which I will say made me go, man, I miss him. We talk about, we talk like Dave talked about, this current phase of MCU films has been like kind of hit and miss. And like even the Iron Man movies that weren't great, Robert Downey was still incredible. I mean, he was just entertaining, and I so bought into his character. And they're trying to do that with Benedict Cumberbatch and Doctor Strange, but it hasn't gotten there for me yet.
Well, I feel like they're trying to split that charm into both Paul Rudd and Benedict Cumberbatch. And we talked about that in Ant-Man, where it's like the charming, quippy, affable one is Paul Rudd, and the smarter than you going a million miles an hour and not waiting for you is Benedict Cumberbatch. And Downey was doing both of those things at once.
Speaking of people who are not narcissists and yet also very charming, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Again, I have to make an effort to keep you from getting pushed into the background from all the rest of us chatterboxes who love to talk. I want to get some more insight from you about the film, especially considering you said that this is one of your faves, and it still is. I mean, what are some other things that you'd like to bring up?
I think I could probably just maybe expound on what I said in the intro, that the relationship, the conflict between all the characters, specifically Captain America and Iron Man, feels very earned. At this point, we can keep treating the DC films as the whipping boy as an example, but it's like, at this point you care about these characters because you've they've been around for a number of years. Clearly the audience connects with them. They're sort of the leading the charge of the popularity of these movies, the two biggest characters at this point. And then all of a sudden they're butting heads in this movie, and the conflict just feels like, you're invested in it at this point. And it's you compare that again with a movie like Dawn of Justice, where it's like, okay, you had Superman, this is his second film, and the first appearance of Batfleck. And it's like, whether you liked him or not, Ben Affleck as Batman, that conflict between the two characters, maybe some people cared about it, and I'm a huge Batman fan. I did not care about it. It didn't feel like I really cared either way what was going to happen between, in the fight between Batman and Superman in that movie. And that should be like a huge moment. Those are arguably the two most popular comic book characters of all time, and that includes Marvel's Batman and Superman. And they found a way to screw that up by, bringing them together on screen for the first time and having them duke it out, and to do that in such a way that the audience doesn't really care, or it doesn't feel like a big event. It's like, how do you mess that up? And then you have Marvel on the other end, where, as we talked about, going back to the very first episode of this podcast, Iron Man wasn't exactly, an A-list character, going into at the launch, the outset of this whole cinematic franchise, this enterprise of films. The average person, would, might know the character by name, but wouldn't have the same familiarity with him as they would Spider-Man, or, probably a couple members of the X-Men, the Hulk even. And then here you are, what is this now? 2016 would have been 8 years into the MCU. And now he's this, everyone knows him, and I think it's that the popularity of the character, but a big part of that is the charisma and the popularity of Robert Downey Jr. But again, it feels earned because you've had several Iron Man movies, you've had several Captain America movies. To Tom's point, it is kind of like another Avengers movie. You have all the Avengers. I'd say it's a better Avengers movie than Age of Ultron was, and it just feels like everything. At this point, everything feels like that tension feels the audience is invested in it. I don't think I could really say it any better than that. You care about these characters, and the movie has phenomenal action. I think this is long before we get to the point where we're at now. I think people are starting to notice that it seems like they're starting to cheap out on some of the effects and some of the specifically a couple. And it's not just Marvel. It's it's infected, I think, some of their Star Wars properties as well. But it doesn't have the production values or visuals that you would that are kind of up to snuff with what you'd expect. Some of the more recent Marvel things, but here everything still looks great. All the effects, all the action feels very, fully realized, fully, thought out. And even there were some moments, I know, Elliot, we saw it together, but in Love and Thunder, some of the effects, the animation, it's like you would think at this point, technology is constantly advancing. Things would look better than a movie like Civil War, which is what at this point, 6 years ago. But it's not. You'd think it'd be moving the opposite direction, but things are starting to feel a little, kind of thrown together, a little tackier looking.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, Dave, because there was just an article, I believe, in Variety that was kind of taking aim at Marvel and saying how they have a penchant for rewriting things at the last minute and making the VX houses work around the clock to redo scenes that they would have taken 3 months to do and give them a week. And then also they're bidding houses against each other and going for the lowest denominator. So they don't have the manpower to complete these effects that they would have if Marvel didn't take the cheaper option. So they were, it just came out like a couple of days ago. So it's interesting you brought up that the effects were better 6 years ago, because they were. Mm-hmm. They had more time and they had more budget.
Yeah. Yeah, you could make the argument now, and I certainly don't want this to become an anti-MCU podcast, but they're maybe spreading themselves too thin. There's maybe too much stuff happening now between the films and the television series, the Disney Plus series, that, if it starts to compromise the quality of the product, then that becomes a whole separate issue. And I think there's, again, we're still in kind of prime MCU at this point, where some of the best movies are have come out or are too soon to come. But, once we get to what is the current phase, we're in phase 4, mm-hmm. That we could have a discussion about sort of MCU fatigue and whether that's a thing or not, and if any of us feel it yet.
Well, if there was any fatigue, I think going into 2016, and we've talked about characters suffering trauma, and kind of the weight of that. If anything was going to relieve some of the pain and the trauma and get everyone excited in 2016, it was going to be Peter Parker.
Yep. I thought you were going to say Ted Lasso.
That was 2019.
Oh, okay. No, that was 2019. But Peter shows up in this movie as just, I don't know, very authentically high school kid.
Well, that's the genius, I think, of Spider-Man. And the Spider-Man was a very late addition, as we were just saying. Like, Marvel has a penchant for rewriting things. I think the story is famous enough where we don't have to get into the details, but because of the Seth Rogen, James Franco movie, The Interview, North Korea took issue with it and leaked all of Sony's emails. And part of those threads were that Marvel and Sony were thinking of working together. When this was made public, the fan outcry was so strong that they decided to renew talks, especially after the last Andrew Garfield movie bombed. But Marvel had no time. They auditioned Tom Holland very quickly with Robert Downey Jr. in the scene where they're in their bedroom that was written for the audition and used. Spider-Man comes in, goes out, doesn't really affect the main plot. But you're right, Tom. He's so organic. And I think Marvel knows what they have. They know we've already seen 5 Spider-Man movies. Everyone knows who this character is. So they do the shorthand of like, well, Spider-Man's in here now. We're not going to do the origin. We're not going to show you Peter Parker going to school or getting bitten by a spider. But on the same hand, they go, what haven't we seen in the last 5 movies? And it's like, well, we haven't seen this. And what does the MCU not have in a personality type when everyone's walking around telling jokes? In the comics, Spider-Man was the funny one. But when Iron Man's telling jokes and Hawkeye's telling jokes and Captain America's telling jokes and Ant-Man's telling jokes, how does Spider-Man stand out? And what they do is they make him the youngest character who's ever been in the MCU. And they give him all of that enthusiasm. He's a puppy in this. He's just too much energy. He's so excited to be there. And it's a color that we don't have before. So you get this mix of the most recognizable character in Marvel who hasn't been in it since. I mean, Spider-Man has arguably been the most popular character Marvel created, even when he was created in the early 60s. And you do this, you give it this breath of fresh air for the entire franchise. I mean, this is only going to roll into 3 more movies we're going to talk about that are arguably more successful than anything that's done with the character. And it's one of my favorite things. In fact, my 8-year-old loves Spider-Man and hadn't seen this movie. And we didn't finish it because we got to the end of that fight. And he said, is Spider-Man in this anymore? I was like, no, he's not. And he walked out of the room. So it took a little while to finish this movie.
Tom, real quick, I don't know if you've ever been in a fight, but there usually isn't this much talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can someone tell me how old this kid is? I don't know. I didn't carbon date him. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Tom, you're a lawyer. I got to know, legally speaking, whose side are you on? Tom or Tony? I mean, I'm Tony or Cap. And morally speaking, whose side would you be on?
Okay, so my daughter's asking me a question. No, that's all right. The goldfish are fine. So in terms of the law, this is an international treaty, so that is somewhat outside of the frame of the normal U.S. federal code or the normal civil code. Since this is technically a private organization, they would definitely be subject to the laws of Nigeria for everything that happened in the opening scene of the movie, which we haven't even talked about in that great sequence. I would expect that many large civil lawsuits ensuing from all of the Avengers actions, certainly, particularly in the United States, where we have no socialized medicine and everyone's paying their own health care. That's what I would anticipate. As far as codifying this in terms of a kind of UN peacekeeping organization, that kind of gets tricky because you're going to need the permission of whatever country you go into. If it's a UN, if there's an official mandate, there's problems with that all over. I mean, we talk, given issues currently going on in Ukraine and potential issues in Kosovo as well, that becomes a thorny issue when you deal with the host country, whatever supervillain is trying to destroy. So that can, and Lord knows whatever happens when Dr. Doom, the King of Latveria, is going to come into this. So that's a big, all I can do is shudder at the number of civil lawsuits that are happening because the actions of the Avengers. From a moral standpoint, I'm kind of on Tony's side, because the need for some kind of elected representative accountability becomes, I don't know the actual text of the accord. That's a document that's this thick, and to my knowledge, Marvel has never put that out on a PDF form for us to read. So, but I get that motivation. And maybe this is me feeling like Steve is just kind of being a dick about it. Because if there's kind of one thing in the law that you can kind of look at, if you were looking at it as a lodestone, is you look at a case and you think to yourself, who's the asshole? And that can tell you a lot about the situation. And Steve, in terms of not wanting to turn over Bucky no matter what, because it's Bucky. And to me, the whole conflict could have ended right there on that tarmac in Germany if Steve had said to Tony, there are these super soldiers in Siberia. Let's all go to Siberia, and then you can have Bucky after that. How's that? Like, we've got 10 jets. We'll be there in 2 hours. Let's just go. We'll deal with Zemo. We'll fly back. That'll get it under the 36-hour deadline that was arbitrarily set. And then that will be the end of it. But he didn't do that. So Steve, to me, Steve kind of bothers me a little bit sometimes. I love the character. I really do, in the sense that he never has to grow. He doesn't have to compromise himself or his beliefs. It's just he manages to outlast everyone else. And he's never forced to make a hard decision and to really lose. So I guess at the end of the day, I'm probably on Team Iron Man. Although that gets a lot trickier when it comes to Wanda, but that's more of a Wanda and Vision problem, I think, than anything else at this point. So we haven't talked about Wanda and Vision either, which is another big setup in this movie that pays off years later.
There was a bit in the whole, and again, I've seen this movie several times, and it was the first time, because I did identify with Steve Rogers' idealism, and as Suzanne had said earlier, I mean, Steve Rogers had already seen the corruption that can go on in government when you're doing when you're saying, I'm just going to go with whatever the higher ups tell me, I'm just going to follow that. And he did that, and he had that come back and bite him on the ass. It's like the whole, no, I mean, I know I have my own he has a very strong moral center. And that's even something that they talk about in Falcon and Winter Soldier later on, where Zemo even says that Steve Rogers was the one that he was when it came to having the super soldiers, that was a supremacist ideal, and that, you can't have that it's antithetical. But Steve Rogers was the exception to all that. Still, watching this movie, I'm going, man, the more I listen to Steve Rogers, the more it sounds like he's saying it's him. He's the good guy with the gun. He doesn't want any sort of oversight. He just wants to be able to say, I get the call. What happens in this situation, I get to deal with it, because I don't trust anyone else to make the call.
Well, that's where it veers from the comics, because the comics was predicated on secret identities, whether or not they would give up their secret identities to the government. And with Robert Downey Jr. saying, I am Iron Man in the first one, they did away with secret identities. Spider-Man still has one because it's such a core of his character. He's like Superman. But almost no one has a secret identity. So this really became about, well, do we get to do what we want? Like, is it about personal freedom? Although you bring up the Siberia, that's one thing that throws me in the third act, is they build up that there's this whole scary army of super soldiers. And it's this, it's that the Hitchcock definition of suspense. If you have a ticking bomb, it has to go off. But when we get there, they're just dead. It's like, it's this weird red herring, because you think it's going to be a big comic book ending where they go to Siberia and all the super soldiers are unleashed, and Tony and Cap and Winter Soldier have to team up together to beat them all. And that's the big ending. And they're completely dismissed, almost as if they were from an earlier draft of the script. And they were like, we don't need them. So Zemo just shoots them all in the head. So that it's something like I both admire and I'm frustrated by at the end of this movie.
I love that part. I love that. I love that swerve, just me personally, because then we get to have this very, very deeply personal fight between Tony and Steve in an ugly fight too. Really brutal in terms of the fight mechanics that's going on there.
It's even a fight where you find yourself rooting for both sides at the same time. I remember even the part when Friday is, Tony's getting his ass kicked, and Friday goes, "You can't match him. You can't match his hand for hand." And then Tony says, "Analyze his attack pattern." Okay, now let's kick his ass. And at that point, you're even rooting for Tony there. You're like, "All right, yeah," It was so expertly done.
Well, it's watching your parents fight. You don't side with one of your parents. You're not like, "Kill her, Dad."
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, and that's what I always feel in both of those fights. And you're right; it does come down to a personal level. It's such an odd ending because it reminds me of Fellowship of the Ring, which is another movie I love, but it's another movie that puts its gigantic set piece in the middle. So with Fellowship of the Ring, it's Gandalf fighting the Balrog. And when Gandalf falls into the pit, okay, spoilers for something that's not the MCU. There's an hour left of that movie, and you're kind of feeling like, well, wait, what are we doing? Wait, didn't it just end? And I always feel that way when Rhodey hits the ground. Like, that's the end of the fight. That's the end of the movie. And then it keeps going to find something else. And yeah, it has a satisfying ending, but it never hits the height it does in the center of the film.
This movie, I say, this movie really evoked Empire Strikes Back to me a lot because it has that down ending. It's very dark, and you even have T'Challa pulling a Boba Fett, where he's following Tony. He's not fooled by the distraction of the helicopter going in one direction. He goes, no. I'm going to follow Iron Man in his armor in that direction. Wow.
See, when you say T'Challa pulling a Boba Fett, I was like, oh, does that mean he clones himself and we still have T'Challa?
And it's funny too, because there's that line he says when he's talking to Natasha about the death of his father. He goes, "In my culture, death is not an end, it's a beginning." And I have this feeling that they're going to be playing with that in the next Black Panther movie. And now that we're going into the multiverse, do not be surprised if they decide to, quote unquote, resurrect T'Challa with a variant of him, coming in at some point. Because I'm sorry, I know so many people were against recast. It's funny when Chadwick Boseman, again, an incredible actor, an incredible talent, and yes, it made an indelible mark with Black Panther. There was this cry, we can't recast the character. We can't do it. There's no way you can replace Chadwick Boseman, which made me feel really bad for Terrence Howard because Don Cheadle came in.
Terrence Howard is no Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, there was a time when people might have said that, okay, early on. But they were against recasting him. That was the hue and cry in the beginning, and now their folks are saying, "How is it that Marvel won't recast T'Challa now? Why won't they do that? Them not recasting T'Challa is the biggest mistake they've ever made." I'm like, guys, it's like the weather. The opinion on social media just kept changing, and Disney was just trying to make people happy.
Well, I think, and this will probably be part of our Black Panther discussion, Wakanda Forever is pretty vague in that trailer. It looks good. But I think a lot of that story is going to be who takes the mantle of Black Panther. And we don't have to recast T'Challa if we make another character Black Panther, and that character is as strong as T'Challa. And obviously that's the problem that Ryan Coogler and Marvel have been wrestling with for the last 2 years.
Well, if you be Black Panther?
Who?
Can a female be
Yeah.
Well,
Shuri was in the comics, so a lot of people think that might happen in this because Shuri's a big part of this movie.
Well, apparently there's a Lego set out there that's already revealed that Shuri is taking over as Black Panther. If they follow the comic books.
It seems to be how most of these things leak out.
Yeah, damn Legos.
That's aren't necessarily canon. Sometimes there's a Ferris wheel in there.
Well, there was I remember when the Indiana Jones sets came out, that blew a lot of stuff. It blew the whole thing that Mutt was actually Indy's kid.
I remember that.
How do you do that with a Lego set?
Yeah, just it got
Is
out
there
there.
a DNA Lego brick that you put on his head?
Oh my goodness.
This is where we got all the great some of the great early looks at the new Namor came from some of the Lego and some of the art that got leaked early. So
I think Namor looks pretty awesome myself. So.
Yeah, he's fully revealed in the trailer, so that's no longer a spoiler.
Suzana, I'll pose the same question to you. Whose side were you on? Were you on Cap's or Tony's side?
Originally, I was on Cap's side because I made a lot of notes when I was rewatching this. But his quote was like, "Well, the UN is run by people with agendas, and agendas change." So there's this unpredictability, and there's this foreshadowing like we will be used. Like once their agenda changes, right now we will be doing this against our will. So is it accountability or is it freedom? However, to Tom's point, then all of a sudden his agenda changed. Cap's agenda changed like when he was, protecting Bucky, or, he just decided that he was going to do it this way. And it's like, I overall would probably side with Tony near the end, right? Like it is a fine line, but I can see both sides of the argument. But there is nothing wrong with like some sort of structure or some sort of accountability. Now, it doesn't mean that like, okay, if we disagree with that, then we are going to part ways or we're going to do our own thing. Sure, but I would have to say Team Tony.
Suzana, you brought up that thing about corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that Steve Rogers actively corrupts an active CIA agent.
He does.
Yeah, he kind of didn't he? Yeah.
There was one thing about the movie that kind of annoyed me. And it's that, let's be honest, while the Avengers are being taken to task for how they handle different situations, there's no mention of the fact that, let's face it, the villains had a part to play in this too. Let's say the Avengers do not intercede at all in New York City. They just let Loki do his thing. Let Loki just roll into New York City with the Chitauri. Okay, well, then it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of thing. Every time, it wasn't that the Avengers were being reactive. They were just trying to deal with a situation that was coming at them. The one that, of course, is the big bad is, Ultron, but that's Tony's fault. So
and that's why Tony feels the guilt about it, because he started that whole situation. Also in Age of Ultron, Hulk goes on a complete rampage and destroys a city. So that's another thing where it's like, that wasn't under our control. But then there is that feeling of like, did we do enough? And I agree to your point. It was answering the DC movies, which were showing just buildings being leveled and nobody climbing out of the wreckage, that they went out of their way to show the Avengers saving people. And this movie cruxes on, did we save enough people? Are we here to save people, or are we here to fight bad guys? And I think that's an argument that happens in superheroes all the time.
Because there's that line where Zemo says, yeah, you guys, you came in, you fought, and then you went home, and we never saw you again. That's even a thing that's been addressed in the comic books. What responsibilities do the Avengers have when, they go into a city and they level the block, and yeah, they beat the bad guy, but do they have a responsibility to that community to come back and to help rebuild and all those things? But isn't that, I believe, what in the comics, that's what damage control is about. Damage control is there to help rebuild.
But in the movies, damage control are just a bunch of assholes that piss Michael Keaton off.
or go after Kamala Khan.
Yes. Racistly.
And violate her civil rights. I want to go. I got to pitch it to David again, who again sits nicely in a corner and doesn't make a fuss.
The lights are dimming in his house. He went on standby.
I was using natural sunlight before. The stream went a little longer than expected, so I'm just swallowed by the content.
That's like our first episode of Shaken Not Heard, when I was just sitting in my family room and slowly swallowed by the dark as the sun set outside. Whose side were you on, Dave? Cap or Iron Man?
Probably Iron Man. I mean, I can see where, both of their, where they're coming from, and why they have the positions they do. But I think part of it is I just like Tony Stark more as a character, and Robert Downey Jr. more as an actor. So that made me a little biased, I would say.
There is that idea. I will say, though, Chris Evans was very good in portraying the idealism of Cap, which is something that the only other Chris who came to that level would be Christopher Reeve playing Superman. And that's like, again, they have yet to find. I think actually Tyler Hoechlin in Superman and Lois on the CW, I think, plays a great Superman as far as the spirit of the character.
Well, also when you see Chris Evans in something like Knives Out, you go, "Oh yeah, he's Captain America's a character, and he has a lot of range, and that's what he's choosing to do."
Or he's playing Harper, his asshole character in The Gray Man, a Russo brothers film. Which, by the way, if you watch The Gray Man on Netflix, you're going to go, "Oh, they're using all the same set pieces from Civil War and Winter Soldier, but there is no Cap and Wanda and Natasha in it. It's just, even the same stunt guys." All right. The Russos are going to do really well in the MCU for a bit. Oh, and not to jump ahead because it's just coming to mind right now, but they have announced who the director of the Kang Dynasty is going to be.
It's not the Russos.
It's not the Russos. That will be the director of the Shang-Chi film. He's going to be doing Kang Dynasty. So that should be interesting. That's the next Avengers film. But we're not going to be reviewing that for quite some time. Looking at the comments, Lehman says, "Greetings, Dr. Flores." Thank you, Lehman. Yes, she is Dr. Flores. That's not. I call her Suzana because we're friends, but if otherwise, I would be calling her Dr. Flores the whole evening. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan, for tuning in. Thank you, Lehman. Again, if you're watching us on the YouTube, the Facebook, or the Twitch stream, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up. Please like us. Please share. Please comment. Let us know how you feel. Every thumbs up, every like, every share helps us get noticed more in the different algorithms of these social media platforms and helps these channels grow. If this is the first time you're turning into the MCU review, we are looking at all the Marvel films in order of release. Next week, we're going to be dumping into Doctor Strange, which I'm going to be honest, I don't remember it coming out right after Civil War, but I guess it did. And that was going to be an interesting change of pace from this film.
Yeah, this is where I think there's so many that I start getting fuzzy on the release dates because I was like, okay, Guardians 2 is coming and Doctor Strange is coming, and all I can think of is what has to happen before Infinity War. Yep. But this is the point where we're getting 2-3 a year, and they're starting to blur together, and then we're also at the point now where we're starting to do Netflix shows, which I know we're not covering right away, but we're getting to the mass content of Marvel.
I'm going to ask this question because I know Dr. Flores would love to be a part of that show. But now that it is on Disney Plus and the appearance of Professor Xavier in Multiverse of Madness has kind of made the X-Men films canon, will we be talking about Logan?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about it on this, and then I figured we'd never talk about Civil War.
Right.
Suzanne and I had a nice conversation about Logan after that movie came out. That one hit people in the fields, hit a lot of people in the fields.
I think that was the purest representation of Logan in terms of his brutality and conflict. And I could go on and on, right? That would be an entirely different show. But I spent a year trying to analyze him as if he were a real person. So I had to pretend that he was a real person. And that got me in the super feels. I was crying like a baby at the end of that film. It was incredible. Incredible acting, incredible writing. Everything was phenomenal.
Was the book finished when that movie came out? Because the movie was somewhat recent.
They wanted it to be finished by the time, and it would make sense marketing-wise, right, for it to come out. But I really, really wanted to include that film because that would be the end-of-life psychology. You know, this is like kind of like how do you not include that film in this book? You know, if we're talking about the psychology, you know, and so I kind of fought my way through it and really wanted to include it. So yes, it's included.
What does Hugh Jackman think of the book?
I wish I knew. I have not heard any direct feedback. I know that he knows about it. That's all, you know. And he sent me some, through his agent, some photos to use for my TED Talk. That's about as close as I've gotten to him. But even still, I was thrilled.
And I always say the next one, I think we had a brief discussion about this, but why not the psychology of Deadpool?
That would be so much fun. I don't know how much I can get out of it.
What other, if there was any character in this particular film that you would do a book about their psychology, which one would appeal to you the most?
Of which film specifically?
Of this film, Civil War.
Ooh. I am fascinated by Vision, believe it or not, because of psychologically, machine or entity, right? To machine to how do you even categorize that? I would really like to do Wanda. Much.
Well, because it's about she's got the past, she's got the trauma that we talk about. In Vision, there is that one scene where he misses. He accidentally hits Rhodey, and then they go, "What happened? How could you have done that?" And he goes, "I got distracted." And Tony's like, "How can you get distracted? You're a machine." So we already know that there's a certain human component, the humanity to Vision's character that's starting to slowly, because even Vision made a big about the Soul Stone. He didn't understand what it was, so that it's actually he's more than just a collection of routines and an artificial intelligence. He could be actually a fully realized person.
There's something too with Vision in this movie that it kind of references a bit of Futurama and Bender, that Vision tries cooking, but Vision doesn't eat. He doesn't know what taste is. And Wanda just sips that. It's like, this is not paprikash. I don't know what this is, but it's not paprikash. Even though Vision is holding the recipe, he's holding a printed recipe in his hand, but because he can't taste. And expand on that more, like what does not, I guess you would have more examples now that we live in COVID times, but what does not having the sensation of taste do to a person's psychology that would be different from someone who would have the full range of senses?
More depression, guaranteed. I need meaning in my life.
I suppose that's true, particularly in that scene. I've found that paprikash recipe, and boy, it really will kind of cure what ails you.
Folks, we're not meaning to laugh at the idea of depression. I think I know three of us on the screen here all suffer from depression, so we can.
For example, Dave is in complete blackness.
Again, something you're missing.
Visual manifestation of it.
Yeah, really. If
it's dark because the socks are losing.
The darker, right? The surrounding.
No, the Sox are losing, and that is a perpetual state of depression at this point.
Yes.
So again, a thing, if you're not watching the live stream or watching the video archive, you're missing out these jokes that only make sense if you can see us. So, but thank you so much. If you are listening to us on the Caffeinated Comics, part of the Caffeinated Comics show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, where every other episode of Caffeinated Comics is an MCU review. And in between that, John and Stephen Brown talk about the news in the comics industry of that week, or sometimes it'll be John and I, because Stephen's got like a job as a paramedic and can't always come on to talk about comics because the dude needs to sleep. So,
what other thing you won't see if you're listening to your other feed is what toys were made from Civil War. And the answer is a lot. We are at the point where Hasbro realizes that Marvel is basically their new Star Wars. So we got lots and lots of characters, including this Build-A-Figure Giant Man, which was the first time they made him that big. And then in the regular size, this was a Target exclusive battle-damaged Iron Man, which also came with the first MCU Spider-Man. And I didn't bring out everything, but then this movie continued to be popular. They kept going back. One of the last things Toys R Us ever did before going out of business was to do a Wanda and Vision 2-pack. It was very, very hard to find because most of the locations were already closed. They also, years later, did War Machine from Civil War. This is at a point like Star Wars where they realized doesn't matter when they made a movie. If we make toys of it, people are going to come and buy the toys.
So again, if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, you missed John showing off all his toys. And trust me, folks, I've seen his collection. It's damn impressive. He's fitting it all now in his little apartment.
Yeah, when it was a house, there was a room. And now that it's an apartment, it's every room.
All right. We're coming up on the 90-minute mark, where this generally, I think, we want to give our audience a little bit of grace. Do we have any closing thoughts on Civil War, Captain America: Civil War, before Dave is totally lost in darkness? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, we're sure Dave's here, right?
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, this is still stands tall as one of the best in the series. Might actually be my favorite. I as we go along through the remainder of these movies, I gotta think about the ones I remember ranking really highly at the time. I know Homecoming's one of them, the first Spider-Man film. I also remember being really impressed by the second Guardians movie, but with this one a bit fresher in my head now, we'll see as we move on to the next couple films if my rankings maybe get rejigged a little bit. But yeah, this is just a phenomenal MCU film.
Tom?
Amazing. We went through we had very little mention of the Sam and Bucky relationship, or I guess you could call it the friendship triangle with Steve. But it shows just kind of how deep this movie is. That I think that one of the bigger laugh moments is when Bucky, sitting in the back seat of that little car, asks Sam to move the seat up, and he just deadpans, staring forward. No. But the fact that we could go 90 minutes talking about this movie and not mention that in a reaction just shows kind of how deep this goes and how many layers there are to it. We got to talk about Vision and Wanda and Tony and Steve and T'Challa and Peter, and it's just, and we have we have a 50-foot Paul Rudd as the cherry on top. So it's just very, very deep, and it runs really well, and it's something that could only have been done at that time in that place.
My favorite line was the bit in the airport where Sam goes to Bucky, "I hate you." Suzana.
I love this film so much. So many other films are heartbreaking. Endgame, don't even get me started, right? It was horribly heartbreaking. This particular one reminded me of family. Like all of the members, right? They're family. And it's like watching your family members fight and even like excommunicate each other and the position that places you in. I remember this quote from Vision, like our very strength invites challenge, challenge invites conflict, and conflict breeds catastrophe. Very, very deep. And I would probably just add, like, yes, it breeds catastrophe, but also opportunity for change. And this is just part of their evolution. So, both as a fan and a psychologist, this is like what family goes through. Like there is conflict. You're going to pick sides, right? You're going to like have to make some very tough calls. And then hopefully you can come back together whenever you can. But it's just, again, like, modern mythology reflects reality. Love this film.
And John.
Yeah, this is still my favorite Marvel film because the stakes are so personal. Is that it manages to put everyone in it. It's not a singular story like Iron Man or Doctor Strange, but the spectacle doesn't overwhelm it. And as we go in, I love Infinity War and Endgame, but they're so big to wrap your head around of like Thanos is going to destroy the universe and we're on this planet and we've split up our characters. This is so much about who these characters are, how we've gotten to know them, how they change, and how they're brought into direct conflict. And it makes me laugh and it breaks my heart every single time I watch it. And if we are going to mention favorite lines, which came up, we mentioned it last episode. Paul Rudd steals this movie in a movie where we introduce Iron Man. Stephen Brown and I, for the last 6 years, always say to each other, "Hey, I'm shaking your hand too long." And then, "Hey, I know you too. You're great." That scene alone was worth all of Ant-Man to get him to that place where he fits within the MCU. And that's one of those moments. And Tom, like you said, when he won't move the seat up, there are such funny human moments, and yet this thing just comes crashing down on you. They know the Russos knew exactly when to lift it up and to wait and to when to bring it down. And if somebody's going to call you on your bullshit, Alfre Woodard is the number one choice to call you on your bullshit. She almost made Picard blow up the Enterprise. When Alfre Woodard tells you fucked up, oh, you fucked up. Everyone in this movie is perfectly positioned.
What was that line, Tom? You're muted, buddy.
Paul, does anyone have any orange slices?
Which I still don't understand. I'm like,
like a kid's soccer.
Yeah.
Like after a soccer game because he's just done something that the pimp suit was really not meant to do. So it's just like, I don't know. It's just like him being a literal giant kid felled by an actual kid. But that's,
I always looked at it, okay, yeah, our soccer team lost, but we still get orange slices, at the end.
I thought of it was I'm incredibly dehydrated. Really intriguing.
I'm sorry, Dr. Flores, we didn't catch that.
I was confused too, and when I heard it, I was like, "Is he referring to energy? Like he needs energy, or like?" I was lost.
And yet it works.
I thought it worked. It was like so random, and that was the great part about the line. You could interpret it any way you wanted to. Dave, how did you interpret it before you're completely swallowed by the dark?
Dave needs orange slices.
My interpretation is the same as Tom's, that he's like a kid who just wants the orange slices are like little, I don't know, a security blanket for something like that.
Well, when you get to Ant-Man and the Wasp, there's a lot of juice box. That's coming.
Which makes me wonder if Paul Rudd improvised that line.
I think he did.
Yeah, That sounds like something he would improvise and that they would leave in. There's a bit from Ant-Man that he improvises. That the bit at the end when you know what? I'll just post it on the MCU review page because you're not. I'm gonna just destroy the joke trying to retell it. All right. With that, we do want to thank Dr. Flores for being on the show today. Could you please again tell us about the book, where we can find it, as well as where we can find you on social media?
Yep. The book is Untamed, The Psychology of Marvel's Wolverine. You could find it on Amazon in most forms. And you could find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Dr. Suzana Flores.
And you will find the dedication written to me in the front of... Yes. I mean, I'm only half joking. I'm actually in the dedication. I was like, wow, look at that. I'm in the dedication.
No, you're there.
Again, it's a therapist in you. You're giving me all the validation I need.
You are so important. No, sorry. No, you actually are.
Can I have some orange slices?
You deserve orange slices.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
I'm sorry, Tom. Go on ahead.
It's okay. You can find this week's cocktail, the Savoy Civil War, and all the cocktails that we've done going back to Thor: The Dark World on this podcast, as well as any other interjections and classic cocktails that I decided to make on ReVU Cocktails, ReVU Cocktails, spelled the usual way, at Instagram.com.
And John, I brought John I want to call it the Huggin, but it's not the Hug. It's a Hugin.
Hugin and Mugen. Hugin and Moonin. That was the one from Thor. And then the Age of Ultron one is the Grunfell Old Fashioned. And John, I do apologize for not including a proper sugar cube with that, but you're going to have to just...
Oh, I have lots of sugar in this house.
Oh, okay, then just like, teaspoon of sugar in the bottom of the glass before you put
I have two boys and I'm addicted to sugar. It's easy to find.
Dave.
I am on Instagram at Pinto_noir.
John?
If you are not listening to the audio version of this on Caffeinated Comics, you can subscribe to Caffeinated Comics, where every other episode is the MCU review. But as Elliot, you said, we cover all the news that's fit to geek. In 6 months, we will be celebrating our 10-year anniversary. So you can find that anywhere podcasts are found. I am at Not in My Book on Twitter and Instagram, which is mainly jokes about work and pictures of guitars and action figures.
I've been meaning to ask you how to get a certain sound out of a guitar from a Tom Petty song, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, that's a podcast in itself.
And I am Elliot Serrano, 2 L's, 2 T's, 2 R's. Of course, you can find me on all the different social media models. I mean, I'm on Twitter, but I don't spend a whole lot of time on there. Twitter is a dumpster fire of toxicity. I rarely go there, but you can find me on Instagram, where I also post pictures not only of geeky stuff, but also the food I cook and the games I play, and every once in a while, a selfie. And please, if you are, whether you're watching us on live stream, you're watching the video archive, or you're listening to the audio podcast, please give us a like, give us a share, subscribe where you can, tell your friends. Feel free to comment. Let us know how you feel about this phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So thank you again, Dr. Suzana Flores, who will be coming back to talk about whatever's next, especially when we get to Logan. And I came up with the perfect, I said, we talked about this last week, but we said all Marvel has to do when the new Avengers movie, not the new Avengers movie, but the new X-Men movie that they are in charge of is released, all they need to do is show a shot of a closet with all the costumes that each X-Men would wear. That's it. That's all you need. And put that Wolverine one in the front with the yellow costume and the mask with the wings. That's all you need. Don't talk about the cast. Don't talk about who's in it. Don't talk about who directed it. Just show that. And boom, you're going to make $1 million right there at least. So,
thank you for having me. This is a blast. So much fun.
Thank you for joining us. And I see Dave has been lost to the dark. So until next time, this has been the MCU Review. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you around. Bye.
Hey, guys.